Initially, I thought hubris was a synonym for arrogance, but I didn't know it actually led to a downfall. I was excited at the thought of basing the pieces on this. There are so many possibilities with the word hubris. The theme hubris involved looking at three stimuli: Book 24 from Homer's The Iliad, an article titled Downfall of the Dodger about Jack Wild's memoirs in the Daily Mail, and The Tower of Babel from Genesis 11:1-9. I think the stimuli that inspired me the most would have to be Jack Wild's article from the Daily Mail, because I was already aware of his life, and it felt kind of comforting to know that we'd be working with it, especially as I, admittedly, had not heard of the other two stimuli. Also, the title of the article, Downfall of the Dodger, led me to understand the word hubris more clearly because of the stimuli's direct approach to the word hubris. He started doing something great, which then led to a downfall, as it says in the title. This led me to realise what the society we live in, especially the notorious show business, is capable of. I was in a group with Faye Maroof, Sam Myers, Gaia Studwell and Ramon Ocaña. Our intentions for the piece were for it to show you that you shouldn't try and grow up too fast, and that too much of something is bad for you. I also wanted to show that this piece is a warning for dangers of alcohol and drug use, like a modern day fable. Question 2. An exercise that inspired me in class was the hubris levels 1 to 10, which we did with Sam Plum. This inspired me because it really took me through the journey of hubris, because it involved us having to create a story in our head through improvisation. Ideas for a story for the real thing started to form in my head as we were doing this. Also, it made me start thinking about where our characters in our piece would be in terms of hubris levels as well as status levels. Another exercise that inspired me was a childhood song exercise, which we also did with Sam. However, it didn't inspire me in the way that I thought we could use it in our piece. The words of the particular song that Sam chose, called I Don't Want to Grow Up, became the main theme of our piece, growing up, and how my character, Violet, actually did want to grow up and be older than she was. In class, while doing the flocking exercise, I was completely inspired by the flocking of Amelie, Alex, Sophie and Johnny, because they all mirrored each other perfectly, as if they were the same person, or at least trying to, which led me on to thinking that we could use that in our piece to show how my character, Violet, wants to be like Sam, playing Callum, or Gaia, playing Lexi. We didn't end up using the flocking in the end, but this did inspire us to use power play and ragdoll. Question 3. A challenge my group met was when we realised that in order to achieve the ragdoll and power play movement sequences, the rope down the centre, showing the divide between the past and the present, had to be crossed by characters that weren't supposed to be in that time frame. I personally dealt with this by saying, the movement sequences are expressionistic. If we cross the line, it doesn't matter because our expressionistic characters don't have to follow the rules. I think it would have been better if we had decided to actually make a big deal of stepping over it, as if we were crossing over a time frame expressionistically. A positive moment for my group was when Sam and I first tested the silhouette effect, using a bright light behind a sheet. It just looked so great and different, and this moment stood out to me because that rehearsal hadn't been the best, and when that worked it seemed like everything was coming together, and we had something very unique in our piece. A proud moment for me in the process was when I had the idea that at the beginning, Sam, Gaia and I could play our characters, but in Faye's character's mind, still in costumes to be identified, but haunting Faye's character with guilt. Later in the rehearsal process, we practiced a ragdoll sequence in pairs and realised it was not in sync. I then had the idea that because Faye and Gaia were singing, we could designate certain movements to the words in the song so the sequence was neat and in sync. Question 4. Our piece was the genre of dramatic comedy. We did this by alternating the scenes of the interview, which was dramatic, and the flashbacks, which were comical. However, by the end, the comedy was lost and it all became dramatic. I felt that the audience would feel impacted, and maybe even a bit scared, but also able to laugh. The combination of these two would make it memorable and unique. Each of the piece was chronological with flashbacks. We did this by having Ramon, who was playing Detective Andrews, and Faye, who was playing Emma, set in an interview. Ramon would question Faye, and Faye would tell a story from the past, which would be shown in a flashback. We did this because if it's in chronological order, it's easier to follow for the audience. However, the clear flashbacks gave the piece unique depth without it becoming too confusing. My character was shown to have two sides, snappy and bossy towards Emma and wannabe and sheepish towards Callum and Lexi. I achieved this by showing contrast in the way I spoke to them. For example, I said, "I'm going to stay," to Emma, and then I said, I mean, if that's okay, to Callum and Lexi. I did this because I think it built on the naturalistic aspect of the piece, because it's often the case that people have two sides. The form of our piece was theatre in education. We showed this by Faye, as Emma, basically being the narration of the story. The acted out flashbacks she was telling in chronological order. We chose to do this because it made it easy to comprehend for the audience, yet it was still complex and interesting because of the flashbacks. We used a combination of styles, naturalism and expressionism. We did this by showing naturalistic, relatable situations and then using expressionism to show what's going on in the character's head. We used naturalism and expressionism because I just felt naturalism might be quite dry and limiting movement-wise, and just expressionism might be quite hard to understand. Our language was informal. We didn't go so far as to using slang, but we did use vocal phrases such as "you're right." We wrote our own monologues and duologues, with me writing romances so we could decide exactly what our characters would say. We did this because we wanted the characters to be modern-day young adults, and it is more believable with the characters speaking as regular people, and it also makes it easier for the audience to empathise with them. Question 5. In a part of the final scene, I felt I made an impact when I shouted, "No one can even hear me!" while looking and listening in desperation for someone to come and help my character. This was effective because the audience might expect someone to respond to my cry for help, but no one did, making my character seem even more alone. Again, in the final scene, I also felt that an unsuccessful moment for me was when I shouted, "Please, can somebody," before everyone else whispered, "Help me." This wasn't effective because our piece did have quite a lot of shouting. Also, I feel like by this point, my character would have given up. She knows no one is going to really come and help her, so I think whimpering stage whisper would have been more effective and also make the audience empathise with the character more. In terms of contribution of ideas to the performance, I think Faye's voice was more impactful to the audience than mine because she had great vocal variation, and when she did shout, it was a stylistic choice, whereas my shouting lost the effect that it had. Additionally, in the last scene, Faye had the idea and gave direction that Faye and I should feel the pulse of the word nothing in our bodies. This was very effective because it made it seem like the word nothing almost hurt our characters because they have nothing. I think overall, I was partially impactful because I was really happy with my performance. However, I think my lack of vocal variation let me down. I brought desperation to the stage. Question 6. Looking back, I feel I went beyond my original intentions. At the very beginning, I felt confident about it, and then after we had our first rehearsal as a group, I realised how difficult devising is, and that fitting it into 12 minutes is really hard. I didn't feel very confident about our piece and didn't expect it to go as well as it did. I could hear the laughter of the audience as I, as Violet, painfully, awkwardly tried to look cool in front of Sam as Callum. This was meant to be amusing, and the laughter of the audience I heard reassured me that it was. While our piece was popular with our peers, one point of confusion was the rope in the middle. People were not entirely sure why it was there. I think we could have shown more clearly the divide between the past and the present if we had had a wall dividing the space and each tense on each side. This has added another dimension to my skills as a performer, as I've never had to create a piece before in response to stimuli. I have realised that hubris almost represents something dangerous in society, something to stay away from, and then once you give in and stop staying away from it, you become unaware of the danger, like an addiction.